Okay, welcome to the Beyond Turning Points podcast. My name's Ash Perro and I'm your host. And today we have Karina Machado. Did I say your surname
Yeah,
correctly?
that's right.
Yes, we have Karina Machado. And Karina is a journalist and creator and host of the popular podcast Spirit Sisters and also The Ghost Files. She's a best-selling author of the non-fiction series Spirit Sisters, Where Spirits Dwell, and Love Never Dies. Her passion is sharing life-affirming stories that restore a sense of wonder and awe to our lives and remind us of the healing and power of spiritual encounters. And Karina's just finished walking the Camino de Santiago in Spain. And I was sitting near the beach the other day and I thought of Karina and thought what a wonderful podcast guest she would be. So welcome, Karina. It's lovely to have you here.
Wow, thank you so much, Ash. I'm delighted and I'm honored to be here.
Thank you. I'm curious, I guess if we start, so there's so much I could ask you about your history and your childhood and your professional experience as a journalist as well as an author and podcast host. But I thought for today maybe we'll focus on the Camino, and there's quite possibly things will weave in from your past
I
there.
think that's a great plan.
Okay.
Definitely.
Wonderful.
Definitely.
Wonderful. So I guess my first question is what led you to head to Spain to walk the Camino?
Mm. There's a saying that the Camino calls, and I definitely feel that that was the case for me, that it began calling me probably as far back as 8 years ago or so. And I can't actually pinpoint the moment that I first heard about this ancient pilgrimage route across Spain called the Camino, but I remember a series of little things that sort of, I guess, did work like a calling, and especially when I added them up in retrospect, I thought, look at all of that. One of them was I was working at Who magazine at the time, where I was a senior editor and I was the books editor, and I was doing a lot of interviewing authors. And there was an author that I interviewed who, with his wife, had co-written a novel about the Camino. And it was the author of The Rosie Effect, which that was a really big novel a few years ago, a big bestseller. And with his partner, or his wife, I think it was his wife, they had co-written a lovely, lovely sort of romantic novel about the Camino, and it was written in two voices. And so I interviewed them for that, and we sat there and had a great old chat. And I met them in person, and they told me so much about the Camino, and they gave me a whole lot of practical tips. And for some reason, I found myself taking meticulous notes about everything that they were saying. I thought, why am I doing this? But I knew there was something in me that back then knew that I would be walking this path. Other things that come to mind are even further back than that. My husband and I went out to dinner one night, and I remember it must have been so far back that my children were quite little, and it was a real treat to go. And we had the babysitter, and we went along to a restaurant along Darling Harbour. And I've always loved scallops. It's probably my favourite seafood. And I ordered that, and they came in the most exquisite shells. They were just works of art. And as the waiter was clearing the plates, I said, can I please have these shells? I really want them. And he looked at me a bit strangely, but he did give them a rinse and brought them back. And I took them home. And ever since, they've been sitting in a vintage dish on my dining table. Another thing, my sister went to Spain many years ago and brought me back a little tile that said Santiago de Compostela. And so there were all of these things. And I guess I was being called. And when I think about a novel that I'm wanting to write about at the moment, which is a historical fiction based on my ancestor's story, and my ancestors are from Galicia, which is where Santiago de Compostela is. And when I think about that, and I think about the way that I feel that they have been calling me as well over the last few years to write about them, I think these two things have merged over the years and have led me there. And then in practical terms, what physically got me there was a meeting with a lovely friend who's now a soul friend of mine, Sarah. We walked together, like you, she's a near-death experiencer and an interviewee on my podcast, 3-time interviewee.
Mm-hmm.
And we met, and she said to me, I'm going to walk the Camino. Do you want to come along? This was a few years ago. I said, oh, that sounds really good. So we planned it together, and it was put off because of COVID, and then put off for another reason. And then finally we got there this year, which turned out to be the perfect timing for us in many ways. It was just the right time for both of us to go. So extraordinary turn of events, really, because I feel like I parked the Camino knowing sort of like it was a subconscious, I say parked, and that sounds like a conscious decision, but it was more of a subconscious brewing of the idea in a embrace of trust, because I knew that it would happen. And then with Sarah, meeting Sarah, and she's such a driven, organized, wonderful person. She made it all come to life. All the physical things that needed to happen in order to make this journey possible, she took care of, and we went. It's extraordinary when I think about it. And I've only been back a week and a bit.
Yeah, which was one of the reasons I wanted to interview you now. It was like, the freshness of coming back. And what did you know about the Camino before you walked?
I knew that it was an ancient pilgrimage route, that the legend has it that St. James, who was an apostle of Jesus, is buried in the cathedral there, that his remains were discovered hundreds of years ago in a field in Galicia, and under the Milky Way. It's very beautiful, like your song. And so I loved all that sort of poetic, idea of pilgrimage, of the ground being, pressed with prayer over hundreds and hundreds of years, people walking with the intention of relishing the sacred, I guess, of remembering the sacred, of honoring a person, or honoring something unknown in their lives, well, unknown to us, but walking with some intention. And you can certainly feel that on the way. And it's said to be, along a ley line as well, which I later learned. But these are the things I knew. And I knew that it had been written about by Paulo Coelho, by Shirley MacLaine, most famously, but also many, many other people. A lot of people that walk the Camino come back and want to write about it or create art about it in some way.
And what's the relevance of the scallop shells?
So there are a few stories and legends around it, but I think one of them is the one that most rings true to me, is that the pilgrims in medieval times would walk, and sometimes they were sent. So my understanding is that rich people would pay them to sort of walk off a debt or a sin or something, and they would walk, and then they had to actually come back with proof that they'd done it. So the Camino, so a lot of people, you go to Santiago de Compostela and pay homage to the remains of St. James, but then you can keep on going, and a lot of people do, to Finisterre, which means the end of the earth, and it's where the Atlantic just opens up like this astonishing, landscape, seascape in front of you. And that's where the pilgrims would go in medieval times. They'd bring the shell back to show that they'd actually completed this journey. Now, of course, any pilgrim that sets off on the journey, you can identify them by the little scallop shell hanging on their backpack. And so we've sort of turned it upside down a little bit. And I did hang one of those scallop shells from that restaurant on my backpack, and I gave one to Sarah, and we both had them, but we both left them there. So Sarah left hers at the Iron Cross, and I left mine at a beautiful little rest stop that I encountered, that's run by a wonderful Australian guy called Simon Keenan, and he's got a beautiful story as well. And there was an invitation there in his space to leave your scallop shell behind and write on it what you want to leave behind. And there's this lovely tree that's hanging with all the scallop shells. And to then, when you get to your destination, purchase or find another scallop shell with your fresh intention and bring it back. So that's what I've done. So I left my big one, and I can show you my new. I just brought a little one home, And that's now sitting on my desk to remind me of the fresh intentions that I've returned with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I have a friend and he has scallop shell tattooed on his wrist, and he walked the Camino, and then afterwards he got the tattoo.
Yeah, I thought about a tattoo, and it might still happen. There's a saying that says the Camino begins when you get home. And even though I've only just gotten home not long ago, I can see that that's the case. There's a lot of processing to be done. And I can also understand why people repeat the experience and want to go back. Even while you're in the thick of it, there are times that you think, this is madness, and how could people even come back? I think in that sense, it's a little bit like childbirth. You do forget the pain, and then you just want the sacred and the beauty.
I like that analogy. This podcast is called Beyond Turning Points, right? And the reason it's called that is because we have the turning point, but then I'm always fascinated what happens after. So I'm curious. So you're talking about the pain as you're doing your pilgrimage. Do you want to describe what that pain is like? And was there a moment where there was a turning point that shifted in your relationship to the pain or to the experience?
Yes, definitely. And I'll also say, though, before I talk about all that it's very interesting, the name of your podcast, because there's a greeting, and it is an ancient greeting along the Camino that people would say, the medieval pilgrims would say to each other, and it's ultreya, they would say. And that actually translates as go beyond. So keep going. And so when I saw the name of your podcast, I thought of that. But the pain along the Camino is multi-layered and multidimensional, just like the Camino itself. So you will have physical pain and discomfort of the journey itself, the length of the kilometers, and whether it's the heat of the afternoon. For me, I struggled a lot with heat. We were very lucky. The climate, it was okay. The time, considering there's a heat wave in Europe at the moment, we missed that, and we had quite mild conditions. But having said that, there were many afternoons where it got very, very hot, and I'm quite susceptible to heat and sun. And because I was always covered up because of the sun, I felt very hot. And so there's that. And then there were days where I just thought, I can't keep on, like I need to stop now. And they were the longer days, which were kind of around 34 kilometers or so. It was a lot for me. That was kind of my maximum. And but what would happen with that pain is that it would bring up emotional pain, and it would bring up whatever it is that you've buried deep inside. It is like the Camino shines a big floodlight on the inner life and the inner journey, and you can't help but look at it. You must look at it because it's bright. It's shining bright there for you to look at, and it can be pretty ugly what you encounter under there. And whether that is enabled because of the mystical qualities of the Camino, the ley lines and all of that, or maybe it's just the physical exertion leading to, because physical exertion can lead to kind of these transcendental experiences as well, is my understanding. Who knows what it is, but definitely it is like that floodlight that is shining on what needs to be looked at and healed. But of course, you can't heal something until you look at it. So the Camino really helps you there. And there's also a sense that it does it with great love and mercy and gentleness, even though in the thick of it, you might feel like this Camino is whipping my butt right now. So there was a lot that came up, and, you can be walking with tears. Sometimes I was singing with joy. There are extremes on the Camino and paradoxes. Sometimes, I'd be singing, my favorite Fleetwood Mac song, Landslide, and other times I'd be just crying, and seeing, the unkindnesses that I can say to myself. And so, you're holding a lot at the same time as you walk.
Yeah. Was there a particular insight or something that you had that shifted your relationship to that pain?
I guess eventually, close to the end of it, and we walked for 36 days, including about 4 rest days in between, scattered throughout. Towards the end, somehow, by some Camino magic, I just began to accept myself.
Mm.
And even though in the hardest moments, I was angry with myself for being little and taking little steps and being slow. And then eventually I found, I just thought, gosh, look at that. You would never speak to a friend like that, or another being, and look at how you're being with yourself, And so then I found humor and acceptance. It was just a shift that took place. And perhaps that was because finally there was healing. Finally, healing came around, and I was able to think, you are enough. And also, I was walking with Sarah, who is a mystical being herself, since her NDE before, but we walked separately because her pace is a lot faster. And at first, that brought up I'm not a competitive person, but it brought up, I'm falling behind, quick. And then when I realized, no, we each walk our own pace, and that is good, that serves, because truly it is a solitary journey. You need that solitude to process everything that comes up. But at the end of the day, we would come together to share our meal, and we were sharing a room as well at our accommodations, and we would talk a lot. And she gave me a mantra. She gave me a mantra around love and being love. And I began to say that to myself, and it did begin to work a kind of magic. Or just enable a shift towards acceptance. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And have you noticed that since you've been home, a shift coming home?
Yeah, definitely. I found a strength. Like I feel like I'm a stronger person. And even though this book, which is my first novel, so I've never written a novel, and it's been, as I said, calling me for years, and I have had so much doubt about whether I can do it. And it is because journalism and fiction writing are two very different things. I feel like I've cracked that doubt, and I'm able to now just sit and just give it a shot, give it a shot, Karina, and stop, trying to forecast what may or may not happen. And that's a wonderful lesson. There are a few lessons of the Camino. I've noted down a few, and one of them is trust the path that unfolds. Just keep stepping, and keep going. And definitely there is a lesson in the Camino, for me anyway, about not looking back as well, and not going backwards. There were a few times where, for reasons of getting lost, or once we overshot our accommodation because it was a shorter day, and we just overshot it. And then both Sarah was ahead of me, but we both felt the same repulsion for the idea of going back. So we just had to go forward, and that involved, I was at the destination, so then I called a taxi to take me to the new place that Sarah had organised, and involved a bit of, getting the luggage to and from, but it felt like the right thing to do. To go back, just turn around and go back, just felt so wrong. Yeah.
I'm feeling just you saying that. I'm feeling that in my life, and going, actually, I can't go back. There's something that I feel that repulsion about. I don't live a conventional life anymore as far as the 9 to 5 goes, and to go back to that, I just have such. I'm
hearing you there. Definitely. Yeah.
Thank you. And how long's the Camino? What's the...
it's around 800 kilometers. Where so we did it's called the Camino Frances, the French way. So it begins at Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, which is on the French side of the Spanish-France border. It's at the foot of the Pyrenees Mountains, and so you walk so you cross the Pyrenees. So it's very much a baptism of fire that first day. Uphill, it's extraordinary elevation, and
wow,
it's
day one.
That's day one. Yeah.
Right.
Some people split that day and they stop. There's a refuge in between, and some people stop there and have a rest and then continue the next day. We didn't, and we walked into Spain. And that was very beautiful as well, walking into Spain. Despite the physical exhaustion, I felt the welcome of the country, which is the ground of my being on my mother's side, that ancestry. And they're the ancestors I want to write about, because they immigrated to Uruguay and then my parents immigrated to Australia. So immigration is very much a theme in the novel. And yes, I just felt the welcome of there were beech trees lining the path, and I just remembered a beautiful soul portrait that a dear friend, Asta, who's in Western Australia, had painted for me. And this was months ago, and she painted these beautiful beech trees into it. And it was like she'd seen them. It was just such a beautiful feeling to walk into Spain and know that I was there. I was back. I'd never been there, but it felt like I'd come back.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? And a side note, I love Asta's artwork.
Oh, it's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, we've connected on Facebook. It must have been through you, but
oh, wonderful.
And yeah, I love seeing her soul portraits and what she creates.
Yeah.
Interesting around the sense of I'm back.
Do
you think that's like a DNA genetic?
Yeah, I do think potentially it is. One of the other things that the Camino does is it seems to kind of scramble or have a different relationship with space and time. Strange things happen. So there's a sense that I'm walking and yet my grandmother is by my side, and there's a sense that, you know, issues that I've not been willing to look at for decades are suddenly there for me to look at and happily, you know, resolved. Like what might take years in normal life is compressed on the Camino. It's very interesting. Like it is just such a mystical, like I use the word mystical to describe it, because the mystery of the Camino really draws me. I really love it. And you meet some wonderful people along the way, like that Simon was one of them. And then there was another guy, an author who'd written a book, and he was just there selling his book, but with this aura of peace around him that I'd rarely encountered. And I bought the book and I've got it at home now. But yeah, it's just, it's transformative.
Yeah. And funny that I guess at the beginning your pack's at its heaviest. Is that when you're walking up the Pyrenees at the start? Is that when your pack's the heaviest?
Yes. And interestingly, the Camino began to work its kind of magic on us even before then, because we had a day at St. John where I think it was a night or two at St. John where we could get ready for the journey ahead. Very quickly, we realized we had too much stuff. Had too much stuff. So we consolidated our luggage and sent a pack on ahead to Santiago de Compostela, to the hotel there, because it very quickly became apparent you can't do this. So just to explain to people, there's something that you can do when you walk the Camino, which is you can have a luggage transfer company for a very humble amount. They will actually take your pack to your next destination. So sorry, not your backpack, but just what you need just for the evening or toiletries, all that kind of thing. So we had that. But even so, having that, we realized we had too much. So we had to cull and send stuff on. But still our packs were very heavy that day, especially Sarah's, because we had the intention, quite, I guess, naively in retrospect, of launching our own podcast on the Camino. And we had equipment and we had a drone, and Sarah was carrying this drone. So her pack was way too heavy, definitely. And we realized that immediately and resolved that at the end. But at the end of the Pyrenees crossing. But definitely another lesson of the Camino, perhaps the first: lighten your load. Lighten your load. And as I walked with that lesson in mind, or illumination, because lesson sounds a little bit like a scolding, but it's not. There's something very gentle and loving about the Camino. And I walked with it, and I realized that a lot of what I was carrying in my metaphorical backpack was not mine as well. So whether it was ancestral trauma, old pain of my families, probably, yeah. And I could let that go with love.
Yeah. And do you feel the lightness of that now coming home? Is there a sense of feeling lighter?
Definitely. I came home with that desire to continue that lightening process. And it began with physical things in my room. I cleared out so many books from my bookshelf. I cleared out clothes. I cleared a lot of, and that process will continue. And I'm sure that it will continue in other ways as well, like where I'll continue to look at what can I shed? What can I shed? What do I need? And there's a sense that I need very little. The Camino shows you need very little to actually get by. So once we'd shed all that initial stuff at Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, I just had this tiny little pack, and I realized, well, I just need, just a few things every night. And even the physical aspects of the practical aspects of what you need, clothing to walk in, well, we realized that you could really just do it if you wanted. If you didn't have the luggage transfer, you could just do it with one set and maybe a spare top or something. But you just wash every night. You wash in your sink and you hang out, and you just can get by with very little. Yeah. It's a good lesson.
Yeah. And I hear you about lightening the material things. Is there lightening of commitments, or is there a sort of like a sharpening of focus or something in that too, of letting go of other things?
Yeah, definitely. So my book has come right into focus. It's right in front of me. It's what I wake up thinking about, go to sleep thinking about. That's definitely come into focus. You think about relationships as well, friendships that have just over the years fallen away, and you can let that go with love, and it's definitely made me think about what can I continue shedding, and also in terms of old patterns and thought forms, what can I shed, and old, continuing that process that began on the Camino of shedding what no longer serves in terms of how I think about myself as well. Yeah, that continues.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I can feel myself expanding as we're talking, as in the letting go, and then there's the space that comes from letting go and having that expansion in awareness. And I just thought of one of my songs. What's the lyric? It's something like, "In the space, there's freedom to plant my own seeds."
Yes, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And space has been something wonderful, because I actually came home earlier than I thought. Initially, I was going to continue traveling. My friend Sarah is still in Europe with her family on travels, and I was initially going to do some of that too. But there was a little bit of a stuff up with one of the bookings. And at first we were both a bit, we're not continuing on together. But I very quickly realized that it was meant to be this way, that I was meant to have time at home before work commences again next week to continue focusing on my book, but also just to rest and recuperate. It's taken me at least a week to get over the jet lag, but I feel like it wasn't probably just the jet lag. It was just the immersion, being immersed in that experience, and then being kind of launched into this life again. And there's just I guess a discomfort and a mourning as well. I was talking about that with Sarah. I was saying, I'm mourning it. I think I'm mourning our Camino. And there's also a sense that it was a dream, that, when you wake up and you've had this dream, you're trying to grab the tail of it and it just goes. And there's a sense that the Camino was that as well. Although I know, obviously, I did it, but it just feels dreamlike.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's enlightenment is temporary, but it changes us, and we forget what the enlightenment was like, and then we change somehow.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I've got some Paulo Coelho quotes
Great.
so about the Camino, and I thought I'll have a look through and oh, actually, what about this one that stands out? Every step on the Camino is a step closer to understanding the purpose of our existence.
Wow.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
were there any insights for you around the purpose of your existence?
Yes, the purpose of, yes, there was actually. And well, I know that I'm here to write. That's one thing that is stamped on my soul. Like that is my purpose. But around that, I reflected on I guess the nuances of that. So the writing is one expression of a bigger purpose, which is to remind people of their connection to divine love, and to remind people that they're not alone, and that we are part of something much bigger that we can't even begin to understand, but it's there and it's loving. And I feel like I was born with this knowledge, and I mean, I think we all are, but I was conscious of it even from as a little girl. I remember if there was discord around me, and there was sometimes in my family, and that's, you know, one of the traumas of immigration that I'll write about. But any kind of conflict and discord, and there are photos of me sometimes, and I'm looking just quizzically because I'm trying to understand what's going on here. This isn't right. It's not how we're meant to be.
Yeah.
And I think for me, the early fascination with the paranormal, the spirit world, was a portal to that understanding of that divine love. And that I understood, that came into clarity for me about the mission that I accepted when I came into this life, was to help people to remember the truth of who they really are. And sometimes that's been a painful journey in this life, because you feel it's very easy to feel very alone in that knowledge. And yes, but my podcast, my writing, they're all expressions of that. And even when I did the Ghost Files podcast, which was a podcast that was commissioned by New Idea magazine at the time, you know, even within that genre of the ghost story, I made certain to weave in the thread of honoring the truth of what's behind the appearance of a ghost, which is something extraordinary and something quite beautiful that we can't really understand, but that is there to remind us of an eternal connection that we have with the divine. So yes, I was able to give language to that, and just expand on what I always thought was my mission, which I knew was my mission, which was to be a writer, but there was more.
Was there a moment that happened? Was it like was there a pivotal moment, or was it just, it kind of seeped in as you were walking?
I feel like it did seep in. It did seep in, and that, I think I have to thank the Camino. You know, there was something about something very healing about walking along that sacred ground. And I was walking towards my story. I knew that too. I'm walking towards my story. I'm walking towards my great-grandparents. I knew I'd be visiting their village where they were born and raised, and where they left to go on that big ship across the Atlantic. And so I knew, and I was walking towards that. And I feel like that journey of walking towards them helped me realize that what I've just explained to you, it did kind of seep through as I walked along this holy ground.
Okay, wonderful. Yes, I love, I've communicated to you before about how I'd like to walk the Camino. And I think the seed was planted, The Pilgrimage by Paulo Coelho, in that book. But also my friend Ryan, who has the scallop on his wrist. And it keeps coming up, and And we'll see. We'll see.
Oh, I have no doubt, Ash. I have no doubt, because once it calls, you will find a way to go. And I can see you on it. Like, I can see you on it now. You fit there. You'll love it.
Yeah, I already feel like I fit there. And
Yeah.
there's something so special about a prayer walk.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Mm, mm,
And beautiful. You see so much. And paradox, that idea, I mentioned that before. The Camino, it enfolds so much, so many extreme, like just polarity and extremes and paradox. So you might in one day just be attended to by the most wonderful cafe owner, and just, have such a joyous interaction. On the same day, hours later, you might be attended to by the grumpiest young waitress you've ever met in your whole entire life. And but everything served. So that encounter, for instance, with a grumpy young waitress, it served to remind me of the power that we have, even in our most minuscule interactions with one another, to either lift or to squash another, in terms of our energy. And I was very conscious of that and could explore it. And as you walk, you explore those thoughts. And it was a beautiful reminder, about what we can do with our energy every day to improve or not another's experience.
Yeah, I think, you talked about walking, right? And processing as you walk.
Yeah.
I think that's something that's lost in our modern society. We're in a car, we're driving, there's other cars. It elevates our anxiety levels being in a car traveling at speed. There's radios, there's music going, or there's podcasts going, and that ability to process where, in the past, if I was going to a friend's house, I either had to hop on a horse or I had to walk there. And so there was a processing period between me leaving home and arriving.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's almost there's this intensity, particularly here in Sydney, there's this intensity to being in a vehicle and traveling that I don't get to process those emotions as much.
What's very interesting about you saying all that is that I don't drive. I'm one of those rare Sydney-siders. I don't have a car and I don't drive, and I never have. Well, except when I was 18 and I got my license, I drove a little bit, but then I left it because it felt like it wasn't for me. It just wasn't for me. And maybe looking back now, I think, well, that was just pointing to the kind of person that I am. And although I judged myself mercilessly for it at the time, now I just think that was me. And in all of those years of riding the bus and the train to work, I've been able to read, all these books, and I've been able to, in the time before podcasts, and just have reflection time or write. And I wouldn't have had that. I wouldn't have had that. And so I guess I've been preparing for the Camino my whole life, in training anyway.
Yeah. It makes me think of when you said at the beginning about walking your own pace.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Yes.
I'm going to have a look at some more of these quotes. What about this one? On the Camino, you learn to embrace the unknown, for it is in the uncertainty that we find our true selves.
It is in the uncertainty that we find our true selves. That's very beautifully put. And I think that's true, because for me, going on the Camino was an uncertainty. It was completely out of my comfort zone. Again, paradox. I've been preparing for it all my life, yet, I'm an introvert. I like my bed. I don't really like to go very far. And here I am across the other side of the world doing this enormous trek. But in that uncertainty, I guess I backed myself that I would find something of value. And I did. So I do resonate with that quote. And I think we want certainty most of the time, especially in our modern life, and we even found that on the Camino, where a lot of what was planned had to be let go of, starting with the baggage. you know, and there were other aspects that were planned, because that's what we do in life. We plan and we plan. The Camino was not there to be wrestled with. It walked us, and that became quickly apparent. The Camino's walking us. You know, and so I really do agree with what he says there, that we do find ourselves in that uncertainty, and it involves a level of trust, and trust is certainly a lesson of the Camino that I've come to embrace. Trust the path that unfolds.
I love the concept of the Camino walking you. I know in Bono from U2, in his book, he talks about something along the lines of, when he truly becomes immersed in a song, it's when the song is singing him.
I love that. Yeah, that's really beautiful. Yeah.
Reading that certainly made me reflect. It's like, that's true. It's just something about when I don't have to steer the ship, or I don't have to push it, that I'm the one being guided by whatever that experience or creativity or whatever it is.
Yeah, just like, you know, you look in your garden and how the flowers grow. So we know that we plant the bulb or the seedling, and then how the rest happens, we've got no idea. But we get out of the way and there it goes. And I guess we're like that too, but we get in the way of ourselves very often, just with the ego and modern life, you know.
I was playing with this lyric the other day, and it was, does the tree hold on to the last leaf in autumn? It's like, whereas that, you know, propensity that I might have at times, like, oh, gotta hold on. Whereas it's nature for it to come and go.
Exactly. Yes. Beautiful.
So was it weird? I've done retreats and things, and when I've come back into the world, did you know, I've had that sense that it's like the Matrix, or, you know, this kind of weird place. Did you have that experience after walking for so long?
Yes, I did. And I think it was in the coming home, though, because after I finished the walk, I had a couple of nights in Santiago de Compostela, which was lovely, because that's when I was able to organize to go to my great-grandparents' village, which was only about a 40K drive away. And it was, so I guess I was still immersed, even though I was no longer walking, I was still immersed in the gifts of the Camino, which was this reconnection with my roots. So that Galicia, I mean, I love all of Spain, but there was something about Galicia, mystical land with its Celtic, you know, origins. So it's such a beautiful, enchanting place. But so I guess
the
I was
northeast,
northwest.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm bad with geography, but north.
Right, sort of up the far left corner.
Yes,
I've been there. It's stunning, so stunning.
It's beautiful, and a lot of the landscape looks like Ireland, and that they did have all that Celtic immigration. I think, I can't remember, 600 years ago or something, or more. And so, which is interesting, because I've always felt an affinity with England and Ireland as well, and just that territory, that landscape, and those places I felt quite at home. And so I thought, well, perhaps there is this link. But again, to your question, but when I got home, yes, I did feel removed from the experience of being at home. And I don't know how much of that is because of the exhaustion and the jet lag and all of that, but yeah, there is a sense that it is kind of like an illusion, isn't it? And coupled with the idea of the Camino feeling like it's a rapidly fading dream, it is easy to begin to question what is actually real. What is actually real? I don't know.
Yeah. And I guess too, if sort of extending on that concept of letting go of stuff that's not required in your backpack, is what do we have in our world that we actually don't need, that is just so what most people devote their life to.
Yes. Yes. And I feel just on a practical level, things like going out like for drinks or something. I've always been one of those people that my first instinct is I'll say yes, and then I'll think of all the ways I can get out of it, and that's been magnified. I'm now, I don't know, I guess in a way life can be likened to the rhythm of breathing, and the Camino was a big exhale. I was out in the world. Now I'm in the inhale, and I'm processing, and I'm quite happy to be just almost in hibernation at the moment. Just
so
to
do you think
see.
that's what's next for you, is a bit of hibernation and focusing on the book? And
Yes, I do. And I think it will be a bit of a challenge to go back to work next week. I've got a lovely job with beautiful colleagues, and it's only 3 days a week, and I'm very grateful for it. However, I am a different person now, and I feel like I could sit happily and just be immersed in trying to express this story that is in me, and it's been brewing like compost for years now, and now it's ready to be harvested. And so that aspect of going out into the world and getting on the train and going into the city, I think that will be a bit challenging. Yeah.
Seeing you as a pilgrim amongst pilgrims on the train.
Yes. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Okay, well, that feels like a good place to start to wrap things up. How can people get in touch with you or access your work?
Oh, thank you. So my website is karinamachado.com, and you can message me through the website. I'm also easy to find on Facebook and Instagram as Karina Machado Author, and you can message me there and see what's going on there. My podcast is Spirit Sisters, and it's on all the channels. So as I said, did I say to you when we started, Ash, I think it's going to be on hold now for a little bit while I focus on my book, but it's still very important to me, and I know it's very important to a lot of people. So I'll keep it in my heart and in my mind, and think, I'll find my way back to it when the time is right. So, but for now, there are 70 something episodes on there that people can dip into and enjoy. It's really gratifying when I hear from the listeners about what it means to them to hear these stories. So, so that's it. I'm easy to find online.
Great. Well, and I love your podcast, and I listen to, actually, I've got a book here from Debbie Malone.
Oh, you got Debbie's book. Yes.
Yeah, which I've been exploring about halfway through. It's been fantastic, and
great.
I really enjoyed that interview as well. So
she's a lovely woman, and she's been doing good work for a long time now in this space. So she's a good person.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you for joining me on Beyond Turning Points, Karina.
Thank you so much, Ash, for having me. It's been wonderful.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. And I look forward to reading the next book.
Yeah, well, we'll touch base again when that comes out.
Yeah, I'd love that. All right.
Maybe you'll come on my podcast.
Well, I'd love that too. Yeah, I love our chats.
For a revisit. Thanks, Ash.
All right. Thanks, Karina.